Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Dr. Bruce Chalmers. He is a psychologist working with couples for over 30 years through his teaching, consulting, writing, podcast, and videos about relationship. His ideas have helped thousands of couples and their therapists. He's also an author of 3 books. We'll talk about all that. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bruce.
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Dr. Bruce. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk. Right now, we'll be talking about relationships. We'll talk about betrayal and forgiveness in relationship. We'll learn all about this from you. But before that, let's understand a bit more about you, Dr. Bruce, so that about your journey, about your background, so that people know who they are listening to and also learn from your journey itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've been a psychologist now for just about 30 years and have been working a lot, especially in the last few years, almost exclusively with couples. I find that that's sort of fascinating. It's a great privilege to be admitted into people's lives that way and to see how people struggle with really difficult things and find ways to not only to cope with it, but actually to benefit from the struggles, I find very inspiring. So I really enjoy doing that work. And the books I've written about that have derived from all of that experience. Most of what I've learned from working with the couples that I work with.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Dr. Bruce. Now, let's understand a bit about this thing called betrayal and forgiveness. First, the betrayal part itself. What is this betrayal? Earlier, we used to talk about adultery and few other things. But nowadays, how should we understand betrayal in relationship? There can be many aspects of it with the advent of social media, technology, and so many things in our life, So help us understand first. Some people may consider betrayal, but it may not be betrayal. And some consider people might be very happy in relationships, not knowing that they are being betrayed. So what is betrayal in today's time, in the age of social media and artificial intelligence, Dr. Bruce?
Yeah, that great question. Betrayal isn't. There's lots more ways of betrayal than there used to be. Certainly, if you talk about a couple relationship, indeed, it used to be somebody could commit adultery, somebody could be unfaithful somehow. Nowadays, there are so many more ways. Sort of defining what people mean by their agreement to monogamy isn't so simple anymore. So yeah, a lot of what I write about is in couple relationships, but there are other forms of betrayal as well in different kinds of relationships. In general, what I mean by betrayal is when somebody hurts you, not merely somebody hurting you, anybody can hurt anybody, but betrayal happens when you have an expectation that they would never do that. So you can't be betrayed by a stranger. You can only be betrayed by someone with whom you have an important relationship. And it could be a relationship, as I say, like in a couple. Of course, infidelity is a classic form of betrayal. But some of the examples I give in the book that came out fairly recently is, for example, business partners. Somebody could be betrayed by a business partner. Somebody could be betrayed by a parent or adult child. Somebody could be betrayed by a friend. There's all sorts of different ways someone could be betrayed. All of that, what they all have in common is you have an expectation of someone based on your relationship with them. And so if you're feeling like, I never would have thought this person would have done that to me, that's what betrayal feels like.
Right, Dr. Bruce. Now, expectation is one thing, and another thing is what comes with the package. Every relationship, comes with a package, said, unsaid. Mm-hmm. And then, it is not about expectations always. What is in the package, people at least expect that. It's like buying something from the market, you open the package, it is not there.
Yeah.
Is it more because of that what you have committed to in any sort of relationship, either couples, parents, children, friends, or anything, that when whatever is part of that package, whatever is part of that relationship is not being followed by one of the person. Or another is also not following it, but the other person does not know about it.
Yeah.
Then should we blame the expectation here, or should we look at purely from that person is not keeping their end of their bargain? How should we look at this part? Then we understand the expectation part.
Yeah, well, that's actually, I write about that idea that one of the first things that, after you're past the initial shock, one of the first things that someone needs to do, I think, in recovering from that feeling of being betrayed is to look at it carefully and see if maybe their expectations were unrealistic. Maybe the other person had no idea that you were expecting a certain kind of behavior from them. An example of that would be parents of adult kids who are expecting the adult kids to contact them frequently or to make sure to include them in certain kinds of decisions or things like that. And the adult children don't necessarily feel that way. And so the parents may be feeling betrayed and the adult children are thinking, what are you talking about? Why would you expect that of me? And so one of the ways of healing from betrayal is to look at it carefully and realize, well, maybe I don't have to think of this as betrayal. I don't like it, but maybe I can think of it a different way so I don't have to feel like, oh, this person has let me down in some hugely important way. So that is indeed a part of it. I will say most of the folks I work with, when we encounter betrayal, it's not ambiguous. You know what I mean? Usually, the most common example I deal with is infidelity. A couple is with me and one person is saying, yes, I did cheat and I never would have thought in a million years that I would have done that, but I did. And then we have to look at that. If the couple's trying to recover from that, usually there's not a lot of, it's not real subtle about, oh, was this really betrayal or not? If somebody was having sex with somebody outside of a monogamous relationship, they usually both know that it was a betrayal, so then they have to work with it.
Right. Let's look at solutions part.
Yeah.
Is forgiveness enough? Asking for forgiveness and forgiving the other person. How does this forgiveness? Are there different kinds of forgiveness?
Yes.
Or is it just saying sorry is enough? Help us understand this forgiveness part. It is for both the sides. Help us understand this from your perspective, Dr. Bruce.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. Boiling it all down, there's basically two different ways to think about what forgiveness means. And they're both in common use, but I have a particular preference for one of them. So one of the ways of thinking about forgiveness, this is not the one I prefer, very common way of thinking about forgiveness. Well, if I forgive someone who betrayed me or hurt me, what I'm saying is I'm restoring the relationship. I'm saying, okay, I can understand what you did, or I can let go of what you did. I don't have to be angry anymore. And moreover, I guess I can risk trusting you again, and I can risk, restoring the relationship to what it was. That's often when people say I forgive you, that's what they mean. I don't use the term forgiveness that way because I think it's limiting. I'll tell you how I use the word forgiveness. I use it in a rather narrower sense. You can forgive somebody who isn't sorry at all. You can forgive somebody you don't trust at all. You can forgive somebody that you would still divorce or still, get a restraining order against or still prosecute in court. Forgiveness, the way I'm using forgiveness, it just means you're no longer preoccupied with shock, anger, panic, whatever that is. You can think about it clearly. To get to forgiveness, I think, is a crucial step in being able to recover from betrayal. It doesn't mean you're going to restore the relationship. It just means you can think clearly about it without going into panic. So the work of forgiveness is internal. I don't know who coined this particular idea. I didn't make it up, but it's a nice way of saying it. Forgiveness is an inside job. It's not something that has anything to do with the person you're forgiving. And I give an example in the book of a woman who forgave her ex-husband who had been horribly violent and had put her in the hospital on several occasions and was still dangerous. He was in prison when I was working with this woman. And she was under no illusions that this guy could be trusted at all. But she wasn't angry anymore. She figured, well, he was crazy. That was unfortunate. He was crazy. When she finally was able to get free, she's never wants to see him again. She's really careful, but she wasn't preoccupied with anger about it. That's what I mean by forgiveness. Then you can think clearly. And it's a difficult step to get to because to forgive someone else, well, I talk about 3 steps to forgiveness. Step 1 being forgive yourself essentially forgive yourself for not stopping it or not knowing about it or not figuring it out. And step two is then a pretty short step. If you've really accepted that you were doing the best you could, I can forgive myself because, if I'd only known, I would have acted differently or I would have gotten out sooner or something. But I didn't know. That's who I was at the time. Well, you can extend that same idea to the person who hurt you. It's like, well, I wish they had done better, but that's who they were. That's what they came up with. Okay, I don't have to fight against that. I can work with it. Now I have to figure out if I can actually trust the person. And the third step to forgiveness, and I have a funny name for it, I call it forgiving God. And you don't even have to believe in God in any sort of, Western theological sense to get the idea. It's forgiving the idea that we live in a universe in which this sort of thing can happen. We think we have control over what happens, and then you realize, no, we actually don't that much. We have some. But things can happen that we couldn't prevent, and we have to somehow be okay with that. And that mindset that says, yeah, reality, even when it's painful, it's right to be what it is. That's what I mean by faith. And again, not necessarily religious faith in the Western sense, but faith in the fact that, the universe, we have to accept what it is and work with it rather than just rail against it.
Right. And talking about forgiveness itself, what should people expect if they have made any mistake? What should they expect when they seek forgiveness? And for people who feel betrayed or who have been betrayed, what should they understand or expect from the forgiveness that someone is seeking, and if they are forgiving the other? How should that expectations does forgiving mean that the other person will assume that you have given them again the same access? Mm-hmm. Also, does seeking forgiveness also should mean that you are expecting that access again? How should when that situation is very dynamic, very volatile, how do you still maintain to keep those expectations in check for both the sides? How do you do that on the ground?
Well, first thing I'll say to that is it's difficult. You're absolutely right. It is a very active. Everything keeps changing at once, including somebody's own attitudes that can change very quickly. But in terms of somebody who is seeking forgiveness, and I have a whole chapter in the book about if you're the one who did the betraying, how might you seek forgiveness? It's an internal process, partly because ironically, for someone to give an apology that might be effective, they actually have to forgive themselves first. They have to be in this place of saying, okay, I'm not a horrible person. I did something genuinely bad. I shouldn't have done it. I feel terrible about, I feel guilty, but I'm still a worthy human being. And I need to start from that basis. And so if I can forgive myself enough, then I can offer someone an apology that actually reflects some understanding of what I did. And that's usually, when people are at that stage, that's usually the tricky part. The person doing the apologizing has to be open to hearing what it is they did that really hurt, because they may not actually know. They may think they know, but they may not. So in actually finding out from the other person, opening yourself up to finding out from the other person, what did I really do? What effect did it really have? If somebody can open their heart to that, there's a chance that their apology will then be actually useful. And the other interesting thing about repairing a relationship, and you're saying, what can you expect from the person you're asking forgiveness of? If a couple, let's talk specifically about, for example, a married couple. If a couple wants to stay together, and they often have all kinds of good reasons why they want to stay together, if they want to heal the relationship, they both have an interest in forgiveness, because neither one of them wants to be the permanent villain, and neither one of them wants to be the permanent judge and jury. That's not the kind of relationship most people want to have. And so they actually have to get to a point of mutual understanding. And, it's interesting. I've noted this with a lot of couples. Sometimes, of course, the person who was betrayed is very angry and just wants to punish the other person. And the person who did the betraying often feels very guilty and expects to be punished. And oddly enough, at some point, the person who did the betraying and is the one who's getting all this anger needs to be able to say, look, I need you to not treat me so harshly, even though, yes, I understand your anger, I deserve it. But if we're going to heal here, you still have to respect me as a person. And often the person who's so angry is kind of waiting for the other person to demand that. You know, I've noted that people often don't want to be, you know, if I'm the one who was hurt, if I'm the one who was betrayed, I don't want to be in a relationship with someone that would accept my treating them as badly as I treat them when I'm really angry. You know, at some point they're both going to have to say, look, we both have to restore our dignity here. And that's a difficult step because it requires a lot of understanding. You know, for the person who was betrayed to understand, wow, this person cheated on me. It's wrong. I'm not excusing it. I'm not condoning it. But I have to find some basis for understanding how a good person could have done something of that. And when they get to that point, that's when mutual understanding becomes possible, and that's when you can restore trust.
Right, Dr. Bruce. Now, say suppose someone asks for forgiveness and the other person forgives. Is it the end of it? How do you know that there is still, something left in the relationship to re-begin or rebuild trust? How do I know? How does one know whether there is anything left to fight for, or is it better to just go two different ways?
Yeah.
Is there a way? Because people are not trained for this.
Yeah.
And neither somebody will tell you about this. Only one side may be perhaps talking about it. How should we? Should we only go by gut feeling, or is there a way out? Is it like some sort of an agreement that can work out, or is it only again purely based on trust and rebuilding of trust?
Yeah, I think that just ends up being very complicated. There's no simple litmus test where you can say, okay, here's how you know if you should stay together or split up. I've seen lots of couples and long since gave up trying to predict which couples are going to manage to get through it and stay together and which aren't. One of the indicators that they're doing really well, and this is kind of an advanced indicator, but I've heard this from lots of couples. It's sort of surprising. One of the indicators they're doing really well is when they start to express, believe it or not, gratitude for the struggle. When they start saying, wow, this has been really hard, but look how much better we are now. You know, I have a story in the book, and I often like to repeat this one. It was really fascinating. It was a number of years ago. I was working with a couple where there had been infidelity, and it was our last session. This was before I was doing telehealth, and so we were in the office, and they were leaving town. So this is their last session with me. And they'd done amazing work over about a year and a half. And the wife turned to the husband and said, hey, thanks for taking one for the team. And he said, oh, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, you know, this was really hard, of course, but now I realize we were heading for problems. We didn't realize it, or I didn't realize it, but we were heading for problems. And you were the one who has to feel guilty. You're the one who did the cheating. So you did the bad thing. You have to feel guilty, but you precipitated the crisis, and we needed the crisis. And look how much better off we are now. And she was saying she was not only better off in her marriage, she was better off in her relationships at work and her relationships with her kids. She had to examine herself in ways that were really helpful. And so she was actually grateful for the struggle. She didn't say thanks for cheating. I've never heard anybody say that. But she did say thanks for this struggle, and I'm glad we went through it together. And, you know, when a couple gets to that point, you know they're doing well. And they don't always get there, right? That certainly is not the case. I'll add one other thing to that. I've known couples also that agree to split up and are much better off and are grateful for that. And they don't hate each other. You know, they agree, wow, this was an indicator that this wasn't going to work. We're two fine people, but not for each other. So we'll split up, and, you know, if they have children, we'll stay in good terms so we can take care of our kids together. But, you know, they're grateful for the fact of learning, well, apparently this wasn't going to work out, so that's what precipitated the crisis. So I guess we needed that.
Right, Dr. Bruce. Now, crises do not come overnight. There are always signs of those in the long years of any marriage or short years of marriage. And in between, friends, anyone else, or even one of the couple would say about therapy, going for couples therapy. And the other party seems to be resisting. Why does that happen? Why are people so reluctant nowadays, also in this age of, you know, so much talk about mental health and so many things? Why are people reluctant about therapy? Is there a hidden sort of a, you know, thing there? I want to understand it. Why do they want to miss out on this opportunity to bring their marriage back to life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, of course, the first thing I'm thinking of is the gender difference in that. Talking about heterosexual couples, it is, I don't want to overstate it, but it's almost always the men, speaking as a man myself, it's almost always men who resist because we don't want to ask for directions. There's that classic idea. And there's good reason for that. It's usually women that want to do it. And again, I know plenty of exceptions, but usually women that want to do it, usually men that resist. And there's reasons why men are the way men are and women are the way women are. It's sort of like when you think about Microsoft software, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's like we're that way for good reason, And what I often, actually I have in one of my I wrote a few booklets in addition to the books I've written. One of them I have a chapter called How to Get Your Reluctant Guy to Go to Therapy. And the basic key there is to recognize that his resistance isn't crazy. To invite usually the woman, to invite the woman to recognize he's resisting for good reason. He's worried, for example, that the therapist will side with the woman, which, it sure seems to a lot of guys that that's what we're apt to do. He's worried that however the therapy goes, she's going to decide to end the relationship, and he's terrified at that. And like most men, we don't want to admit when we're terrified, but usually that's what's going on there. It's fear. And so when the woman is able to recognize, oh, he's not crazy to have that fear, it's well-founded, then the conversation goes very differently. And if he's starting to feel like, oh, she gets why I'm worried, then he's more apt to take another look and say, well, all right, maybe we'll give this a try. And then they can get into therapy. And what I try to set up in therapy is an environment where they both feel safe enough. They're not going to feel totally emotionally safe because it's scary, but safe enough so that they can get through the anxiety without panic. And, that's one of the things I've said in all of my books. It's one of my favorite things to point out. The chief skill of intimacy, and by intimacy, I just mean being able to be honest with yourself and each other. The chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety rather than trying to avoid it. There's going to be anxiety involved when you're worried, oh no, what's going to happen to our relationship? And to be able to tolerate that anxiety requires an environment where people feel essentially respected, essentially that their dignity is honored, and then you can, then conversations can happen. And there's still a lot of anxiety there, but at least they don't have to dissolve into panic.
Right, Dr. Bruce. And talking of couples therapy, you also talk about, that why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong. Is
Yes.
it all wrong? And then what is the right thing? Should they go for this or not go for this?
Yeah, that was my second book. Yes, it's not about communication. Why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong. A rather, shall we say, snarky title, I would say, and intentionally so, of course. What do I mean by that? Well, I will give a little spoiler alert. In one of the last chapters of that book, I point out that applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong also. So what the heck is that supposed to mean? I've written a book and I'm saying everything I know is wrong? Well, really the key is the word to know. It's in saying everything I know about couples therapy is wrong. That's the key. It's not that I don't have good ideas, and so do the couples that come to see me. We all have ideas. When those ideas harden into ideologies, when instead of, because the thing about ideas is they open up other ideas. Wow, that's something I hadn't thought of. Wow, that's interesting. That makes me think other ideas. Or maybe it challenges some of my previous ideas. That's useful. If all I'm doing is defending my ideology, that's useless. It's worse than useless. It usually turns into a caricature of the good ideas. So when a couple comes in already knowing that the other one is crazy, or that they themselves are crazy, or already knowing that this is what has to happen, and I've got to, if they come in thinking that the purpose of couples therapy is to adjudicate their dispute, for example, like I'm supposed to be the judge or something, they come in knowing that, or they come in knowing all the stuff that you can find on the internet, which, will no matter what you think, the internet will confidently tell you that you're wrong. That's always true. The problem is the knowing. So a lot of the work of couples therapy is to soften up all of those knowledges. And so it's a lot about, I talk about this in that book also, it's a lot like improv theater. You come in not exactly knowing how it's going to go, And it's, in the rule in improv theater is yes, and whatever the other person, another actor does, you never say no, you never push it away. You go with it, and then you add something maybe silly yourself. Well, therapy, couples therapy is a lot like that too. Whatever people come in with, you work with that and incorporate it rather than reject it. And I'm always saying, or almost always, every once in a while there's an exception. Almost every couple I meet in the first session, I point out, a little ways in, I say, well, now that I've known you for, for 20 minutes, we're old buddies, I can tell neither one of you is completely crazy. And, they'll usually smile. And I don't mean to make fun of serious mental health issues. And as I say, every once in a while I don't say that because maybe somebody is having a psychotic break or a manic episode or something like that. But usually not. Usually they're not crazy. They're hurting. They're in pain, but they're not crazy. They may be panicking, but they're not crazy. So if they're panicking, whatever they're feeling, there's some basis for it. There's some non-crazy basis for it. That's where I start with. And when people feel that sense of acceptance, that's when they can get past some of that panic, tolerate the anxiety and actually start to hear each other. And that's where that's where those ideas then broaden. It's like, oh, wow, I hadn't realized that's how you feel. This is how I feel. Oh, wow, I'm starting to see why we both feel that way. So I have a name for that. I'm not sure what your language code is for this broadcast, but I call it, I'll call it the oh shoot moment. That's not what I call it actually, but it's the oh shoot moment when we say, oh shoot, no wonder you feel that way. That kind of feeling. That's therapy. When it's working well, therapy brings you to that. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. And then that's when things can transform.
Right, Dr. Bruce. And before I come to the book, one thing I want to understand is instead of seeking all the relationship, wisdom from the right people, from the right trained people, from therapists or whoever it is, relationship expert, a lot of people are nowadays seeking wisdom from shorts and reels and all those things from on their mobile phones. From youngsters who are not married to people who don't know anything about this, and only few experts are there. But can you learn about relationships in those 15 seconds, 20 seconds of shorts and reels? How should people look at that sort of a wisdom? Is it adding to the problem, conditioning a lot of mind towards relationships and betrayal in a very different sense? That will be not good in the long run. How do you see it as somebody who knows about things?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you can learn from anything, and that could be like a 15-second video, or TikTok or something, and it can also be from experts, whatever there are. But I will say, no matter who it is, because you can learn. I think there's wisdom all over the place, and there's also ridiculousness all over the place. And so the basic idea is you can learn from anything, but don't get trapped in ideology. Don't get trapped in that sense of, well, this is the only way to think of it. In relationships, there's all kinds of things out there now about, oh, what if you're married to a narcissist? It's not that concept of narcissism is useless. It's not useless, but it can also narrow things down so much that that's all you see. And so, to treat people as if they were simply a category never works. So it's about, taking wisdom and ideas anywhere you want to, but as long as you still have that recognizing that what you're hearing is ideas, not truth from the mountaintop. And, that's the problem with people who are experts and, those of us in the field. Sure, I think I offer expertise, but I don't claim to have a monopoly on truth. And if I started thinking that, I would not be helping people. I would actually be making things worse, not better. So that's true anytime you're judging any sort of stuff you can find, all these things when you're looking at your mobile phone. You have to judge it on the basis of saying, well, there's some interesting ideas here, but of course there are contrary ideas that are probably useful too. And if you can keep an open mind that way, then you can actually learn stuff. And if not, you go down a rat hole, and that's how people end up, either in cults or in, they'll adopt idea or conspiracy theories and things like that. They'll adopt ideas that are, by their very nature, are just closed down to any contrary ideas.
Absolutely. And now, Dr. Bruce, let's come to your book, this latest book, 2024, Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again.
Just happen to have a picture, a copy of it handy here. Yes, and that book is available anywhere books are sold. I don't know in India. I mean, you've got Amazon in India, I think.
Of
Yes,
course. Amazon, it's a big market for Amazon here.
yes, indeed. So it's available there. It's also available. You can order it various ways, and it's available. The paperback I'm holding here. It also is available for. An ebook and any of the ebook formats, also available as an audiobook where I did the narration. So that's available anywhere books are sold. You can also find out more about me at my website, which is simply brucechalmer.com. And also I do a podcast with my wife, Judy Alexander, called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. And so if you go to CTN7, that's the number 7, CTN7.com. That's our podcast website. And you can also get that podcast on any of the podcast platforms. Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Bruce, one thing that comes to my mind talking about your book is that, this book has got several words: betrayal, forgiveness, turmoil, and trust.
Yes.
When a relationship is in difficulty, when they see this book or this sort of sentences, which word should they first see? Should they think of betrayal? Should they think of trust again?
Yeah.
What will work? How should they look at it?
I think that's very much dependent on where they're at in the situation. When they've first been betrayed, they're going to see the word betrayal and the word turmoil. When they're processing, I just not long ago met a couple where they're working on a betrayal that happened about 10 years ago, where they're finally at a point where they can process it. They're determined to stay together and they've been together and things are better, but the woman in particular, because it was the man who cheated on her, she's still struggling with it. So she's looking at it, at that book, and would be saying, okay, she's not so much in the turmoil phase. She's thinking, how can we restore trust? So she's focusing on the forgiveness and trust part. So I think it depends on where you're at in the process. I wrote the book with the idea that wherever you're at in that process, it can be useful to read this book. Somebody who just found out about it can read it and find, okay, maybe they'll derive some faith that it's possible to get through this and somehow be okay. Somebody who's working on something much older will look at it and say, oh, okay, there's actually work we can do to get better. Some people will read this book and say, wow, not only can we heal, we can be better off than we were before. We can actually be grateful for that. And so that's useful as well. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you picked up those key words. Which one grabs you depends on where you are in the process.
Right. And who is this book for? Is it for everyone, or is it for people who are looking at some sort of, silver lining in their relationships?
Yeah, I'd like to think it's for everyone, but realistically, it's for people. I mean, I think most people who are getting this book are people who have experienced betrayal. I think, the ones who've been betrayed, I think that's likely the people who are seeking out this kind of book. But also, as I mentioned, there's a chapter in there for people who did the betraying. But yeah, in general, mostly it's for people who, either for people who are dealing with betrayal themselves in their own relationship of one kind or another. Not only, as I mentioned, marriage or couple relationships. There are other kinds of important relationships. Or people who help them, so therapists, for example, or even friends. Somebody who's. I was doing a book signing a few weeks ago, and a young woman came over to the table where I was signing books, and she said, "Wow, I'd like to give this to my mother," and I was saying, that's interesting. And she came to realize if she wants to give it to her mother, she actually needs it herself. She needs to work on forgiveness herself. She needs to figure out, she wants to repair her relationship with her mother. She would benefit, and she ended up buying the book for that. So, it could be anybody dealing with betrayal or somebody trying to help someone dealing with betrayal.
Right. One last question for you, Dr. Bruce, is that if after all these things, people want to be together and want to give their relationship a chance, what should be their expectations from that renewed relationship? How should once bitten, twice shy? Or is it the one who has done the betrayal, they feel a bit, cornered all the time because they will always have that feeling, they don't want to give an impression or any sort of a thing, will it be a relationship of equals again? How should they look at it?
Well, certainly that's what I want to help people get to, that they feel like it's a relationship of equals, that they, a genuine sense of mutual understanding where both people feel like, oh, we can feel fully restored to dignity. Neither one of us has to feel like we're, as I mentioned earlier, a permanent villain, that they can both feel honored again. And that takes a lot of work, but when they get there, the way couples get there, I don't want to overstate it, but it seems to me the way couples get there, the only way they get there is that things are better than they were before. And they're grateful for that. Their things are actually better than they were before the betrayal happened. Because the way things were before had something to do with how the betrayal happened. I'm not trying to blame the victim, but I'm just observing there's usually some context for it. If the relationship's going to heal, there had to have been some context for it. Otherwise, if the problem was the one who did, let's say, the cheating was just a serial cheater, well, yeah, get out of the relationship. It's not going to work. But if they actually heal from it, it will be by restoring both parties to that sense of honor and dignity, and they can both feel good rather than bad, and grateful for the fact that they healed the relationship. That's certainly what I try to help people get to.
Right. And talking of your podcast, Couples Therapy in 7 words, will 7 words be enough? What are these 7 words that people can know about?
I just happen to have some merchandise that has that on cup. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. You have to count "and" to get 7 words. Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's a and here's the logo for our podcast, Couples Therapy in 7 words. Those are the 7 words. It's 3 concepts. Be kind in the sense of recognizing your kinship, and you can't do that if you're panicking. So that's where "don't panic" comes from. And how do you not panic? Well, faith is the antidote to panic. Faith means you're accepting that the world is somehow workable. We can work with it. There's something right about it, even when it hurts. And then we can get past panic and actually work on stuff. So that's the 7 words.
Wonderful. There's so much to learn from you about all these things from you, Dr. Bruce. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to connect with you, learn from you, learn about you, get your help, know about your book. So what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Aside from just, of course, searching for the book itself, you can find me brucechalmer.com. brucechalmer.com is my practice website, also has links to my books, and that's probably the best place to find out about me.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.